the wrong one. Hold on. Hold on a minute. I'm nearly there. Alright. That should be it. I unplugged my microphone on my laptop. So yeah, that's a good start. But anyway, I was just saying hello to, in the chat, Zian, Edits, GT, Ralph Hexham, Trevon Wright, The Only Way Out is In. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so Ralph said about roof boxes. I noticed driving around in England that there's a few different types of roof boxes, but the two most popular roof boxes that you pack all your camping stuff in when you go on holiday is one of them is called a Tula, which is the mythical homeland of the Aryans in the north or wherever it was. And then the other one is called Exodus, which is about escaping what would you call it? Enslavement in someone else's land. So it's about escaping slavery. You've got a Bob Marley song, Exodus, and then you've got Exodus in the Bible. Bob Marley's song Exodus probably based on Exodus in the Bible, because Bob Marley probably thought that the Rastas were the real Israelites. But obviously, yeah, you've got Exodus, which means leaving captivity in someone else's homeland, and you're not going anywhere in particular, you're just getting out of someone else's land. So yeah, there's two roof boxes in England. One's called Tula, which is obviously System A, and then you've got the other one called Exodus, which is System B. So even when it comes to camping, something as mundane as camping, we just have two particular brands or two names. I don't know why those names were chosen. I don't know who owns. I think Tula's a Swedish company, but I don't know who owns. And Tula also, interestingly, do a roof box called the Tula Atlantis. So they obviously know why they've called the box Tula, and they know what Tula is, and so they're sort of playing on the whole like mythical homeland of Europeans type thing. But I don't know who owns the Exodus brand. I'm not sure. I don't think it's Israeli or Ethiopian. Anyway, last week we finished chapter 8, which was like a bit of a long one. That was called The Ancient Adversary. And we're going to move on to part 4 of the book now, which is called The Lost World. And this is chapter 9, Power Politics in the Nervous System. This chapter and the next bring us to more detailed consideration of the nature of knowledge 2. The examination takes the form of 3 run-ups to that subject, 3 possible, though not mutually exclusive, avenues of approach. These approaches are outlined under the following headings. 1, the power politics of the nervous system. That's this chapter. 2, essential characteristics of system A and B. And 3, the evolution of Homo sapiens. The third of these approaches forms chapter 10. So we're going to cover the first 2 approaches. So 1, the power politics of the nervous system. We have seen that the central nervous system evolved from and in close connection with those parts of the organism in direct touch with the external world. The central nervous system then perceives and responds to the external environment. It is the external environment whose influence Freud spoke of as the reality principle, which shapes that system's development both in individual and evolutionary, that is, ontogenetic and phylogenetic terms. The autonomic system, on the other hand, evolved from those parts and functions of the primitive organism concerned with its internal economy, its equilibrium, the intake and breakdown of food, excretion, and so on, and with reproduction. The autonomic system is governed and shaped by the subjective reality of the internal environment, a reality differing from that of the objective external universe. Freud has named the influence of this other reality the pleasure principle, a term, although aptly subjective, too limited for the purposes of this book. The autonomic system may be said in many respects to be older than the central nervous system. Initially, the latter is little more than an auxiliary organ or series of organs, which develops from the former, cf. Here Freud's view that ego evolved from libido. Initially, the latter is little more than an auxiliary organ or series of organs which develops from the former. The central nervous system was, in the first instance, only the means for providing the total organism with information about the outside world. Along with this power to perceive and understand the outside world, developed also means of enabling the organism to act on the information received, that is, the powers of locomotion and, more especially, of manipulation. For reasons on which we need not speculate at this stage, it appears that the external receptors, together with the motor systems concerned with volitional movement and manipulation of the environment, gradually cease to be merely an extension, or as it were, the servitor of the total organism, and set up in business on their own account. Today, Homo sapiens, at least the Western variety, display this sign. Central nervous system, sole arbiter and executor of human affairs, no connection with any other organisation. Were this sole executorship really the case, there would be no problem. The analogies which follow will serve to bring out what seems to have taken place in the nervous system of the more complex animals, and especially in mammals. When the central nervous system first began to establish its own autonomy by continuous additions to its holdings of cerebral cortex, the autonomic system, in the manner of a wily old director, laid various contingency plans. It took steps, above all, to ensure that information concerning the external environment continued to reach it, no matter what action in the matter the central nervous system or consciousness might take. What is termed subliminal or below threshold perception is an instance of this. An actual demonstration is provided by the lie detector, where words associated with the crime produce changes in the electrical conductivity of the skin, an autonomic indicator, while neutral words do not, despite the firm desire of consciousness to remain unaffected by such words. While safeguarding its information supply by an underground route, System B continued during the course of evolution to maintain amicable relations with System A on a broad basis and for as long as possible. A united front, or at least the appearance of one, continued to exist. Even in other primates, the two systems worked harmoniously. Apes and chimpanzees in the wild state do not seem to evidence the mental hang-ups concerning emotion, aggression, and other autonomic functions that are evidenced by human beings. It is perhaps significant, however, that not merely these primates, but many animals, including dogs and cats, when brought up alongside human beings, often show what looks remarkably like neurotic insecurity. A similar statement could have perhaps been made about the earliest ape men. But clearly the two-tier system of government must have creaked ever more noticeably as true man emerged from the ranks of the primates. It is extremely difficult and perhaps a little fruitless to attempt to pinpoint precisely that crisis moment in time. Nonetheless, reverting to the terms of our analogy, one suggests that System B, in its ancient wisdom, avoided an actual showdown whenever and wherever possible. Like the Catholic Church, System B yielded where it finally had to, but then always on the best terms available. However, over considerable periods of time, not merely the ostensible but the real power of System B is gradually eroded, almost in the way that a son finally challenges a parent's absolute authority. A stage is reached where System A cannot be denied an equal voice. In reality, the situation was considerably more complex than this, the crisis occurring not once but over and over again and in many different areas, the balance of power swinging now to this side, now back again to that. Perhaps Socrates was the first outstanding martyr to the System A cause, that is, that we know about. In legend at least, Adam preceded him by some thousands of years. Christ, a System B advocate, though also a System B reformer, eventually offers a solution which one hears in many guises on many occasions thereafter: the division of the kingdom into two equal realms, one to be ruled by Caesar, the other by God. This split may yet prove to be the death knell of our species. Therewith, the pretense of unity in the old sense of that term, that is, absolute rule by System B, is no longer possible. System B has been met and matched by a force equal to itself. The foregoing analysis of the development of the nervous system has been couched in anthropomorphic terms. This is, however, not an unjustified ruse. We are, when all is said and done, discussing real people, that is, ourselves. No matter what the objective, scientific or physiological facts of the matter are or may be, the product of these processes is our own experiential existence on this planet. We must never allow ourselves to forget that we are, in these regards, our own object of study, being both the observed and the observer. The facts on which the deposition thus far has been based could have been couched in terms acceptable to the biologist, psychologist, or whatever. Apart from the terminology and the dramatization indulged in, there is actually little in the foregoing that the scientific establishment would not accept in essence. It is in what now follows that the new ground is broken. While maintaining holdings in and a certain direct influence on consciousness, and while allowing the cortex to function as the ostensible headquarters of the total nervous system, System B was evolving, to some extent had already evolved, a data processing, data collating headquarters of its own, a headquarters necessarily camouflaged, necessarily unobtrusive, but nonetheless containing all the machinery needed to produce System B's separate awareness and description of the universe around it. This text has proposed that these secret headquarters are housed principally in the cerebellum. As is the case with all viable guerrilla organisations, what the secret headquarters cannot produce for itself it takes from the legal authorities, either at night while the guards are sleeping, or disguised in impudent daylight raids. Dreams and the illicit use of the sleeping cortex are an instance of the first action. Freudian slips, an instance of the second. 2. The essential characteristics of System A and B. The central nervous system, a System A organisation, evolved principally in the context of the external environment. As a consequence, it views all phenomena objectively. That is, it sees the universe in the terms provided by, inherent in, and observable in the universe. It seeks to apply the laws discovered to itself and to System B. The autonomic nervous system, a System B organisation, evolved principally in the context of internal needs. As a consequence, it views all phenomena subjectively. That is, it seeks to apply the laws it finds within itself to the universe outside it and, incidentally, to System A. One needs to be quite clear of the import of what has just been said. So specialised and differentiated have the functions of the two systems become in the course of evolution that the majority of individuals in our present society have completely lost the sense of their own true totality, being engaged in the attempt to use half their personalities as if it were the whole. Each system in this situation perceives the other as extraneous and irrelevant. This is better appreciated through actual examples. There are 4 possibilities. 1. System B's view of the phenomena of System A. 2. System A's view of the phenomena of System A. 3. System A's view of the phenomena of System B. And 4. System B's view of the phenomena of System B. In tabular form, we have Table 9. Let me just find Table 9. I'm ready this week. Got ready like half an hour before I came down. So, well ahead of time. So there you see Table 9. I've got a really itchy nose today, like hairs off my beard, itching my nose. Table 9 with those examples slotted in, the possibilities slotted in. in certain actual examples based on certain aspects of certain events yields table 10. So that's table 10 below. System B's view of system A is the sun. System A's view of system A, DG2 main sequence star, diameter 1.4 by 10 to the power of 6 kilometers, surface temperature 6,000 K. What's that? Anyway. And then System A's view of System B, moon landing, Apollo 11. And then System B's view of System B, the moon, or moon goddess. We also have in the sun, we have System B's view of System A's, the Egyptian, the Ra, Egyptian Ra, Aztec Inti, Greek Helios, etc., but also Christ, Jehovah, the glory, nimbus, halo surrounding Christ, the Prince of Light, and the saints. And then for the moon goddess, we have Hecate and Isis and Hengo in Chinese. And then there's a note here that says, especially outside Europe and the Near East, however many examples of moon gods as opposed to goddesses are found, this difficulty is admitted. Nonetheless, since goddess worship turning into god worship is a development to expect, one can always suggest that these moon gods were preceded by goddesses unrecorded. There seems, however, no way of verifying this, and it remains therefore merely a suggestion. The statement in the top right-hand box of Table 10 represents whatever else a statement by System A about System A. That is, an objective description of an objective phenomenon. Nothing is included in the description except what is actually observed. So that's our... K is Kelvin. I did think it is Kelvin, but I thought that was something to do with... temperature. I suppose it is temperature, yeah. DG2 main sequence star, diameter, etc. So that's System A talking about itself. So it's very objective. Sorry, I just turned my phone off. I forgot I had my phone on. From System B's point of view, the sun represents the new unknown, and the moon the old known. As suggested elsewhere in these pages, the sun god seems to be System B's experience of the cerebral cortex. The moon is rather System B's experience of itself, the cerebellum, amongst other things. From System A's point of view, the moon represents the not known or not sufficiently known, which System A is in the process of incorporating into the known. Science requires final explanations to test anomalies, impenetratables, and imponderables. And then we've got the note on number 7 is on that. What I've just said is quite interesting. It is interesting here to speculate why scientists, particularly Western scientists, are willing to devote so much of their energies to exploring space and reaching the moon, but so little to investigating the depths of the sea. Actually, a far more accessible treasure house of badly needed information concerning the ecology and other aspects of our planet. We do not, to anything like the same extent, need more information about the moon. Now, clearly there are many factors involved here. The space race is a prestige area in terms of east-west competition, and a strong defence interest is also involved. One would not wish to deny the motivational role of these reality factors. It is just possible, however, that in addition to such factors, the scientist is A, intent on destroying the very strong symbolic significance of the moon, and B, motivated out into space and away from, e.g. the ocean depths, by reason of the latter's association with the unconscious. Yeah, and so when they landed on the moon, they said one small step for man. When they apparently landed on the moon, they said one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So it's like the domination of the moon by science. System B views these two phenomena, the sun and the moon, as expected subjectively. Something of the human being is added which is not actually there in the strictly objective sense, namely an animating soul or spirit. The object is invested with human qualities and human desires which may be superhuman but are nonetheless recognisably of Homo sapient origin. To System B, the position is that some spirit or soul not only inhabits but must inhabit the heavenly bodies and many other objects in nature. We wish, however, to go further. We wish to say that certain appropriate objects, such as the sun, display properties which resemble or at any rate evoke properties of the cerebral cortex, while the moon somehow or other suggests the cerebellum. It seems just too coincidental that the emergence of sky religions, day religion and god worship, and the decline of earth or moon religions, night religions and goddess worship so closely parallel the rise to dominance of the cerebral cortex in human affairs. It is for nothing that we speak of the light of reason, clearness and clarity of understanding, Latin, clarus, bright or shining, unclouded vision, also of blinding insight, dazzling logic, brilliant ideas, flashes of inspiration, enlightenment, etc., but conversely of obscurity and the mists of obscurantism, Latin, obscurus or covered over, the dark ages, etc. As noted earlier, Christ is the light of the world. From one point of view, the earth can be considered to represent the cerebellum, or perhaps the total human organism. The real earth is illuminated alternately by the sun and the moon. In the sunlight, the creatures of the day have their being. At night, moontime, the day creatures sleep and others come to life, who by day remain hidden. We have suggested that the sun may be likened to waking consciousness. When the cerebral cortex is awake and fully activated, we have conscious day thoughts and perceive the day world. When the cerebral cortex is asleep but illuminated or activated by the cerebellum, the moon, we have night thoughts, dreams, and now perceive the world as it subjectively is. That the human organism is actively or illuminated alternately by waking consciousness and sleeping consciousness, while the earth at those same times is illuminated and activated alternately by the sun and the moon, can be dismissed as a coincidence or a totally fortuitous parallelism. In that case, however, one is justified in asking the critic to attempt a definition of coincidence. This matter is raised again in chapter 11. So, how do I flick back to the other? There you go. So persistent are the associations and connections between System B and the phenomena of night and darkness. One recalls, for example, the preference of women for darkness in the sexual encounter, that there are grounds for the suspicion that System B may in some sense have evolved or developed under nocturnal conditions, for we dream as if by moonlight. It is scarcely possible to overemphasize the all-embracing nature and pervasiveness of the differences between the two systems. Their very manner of perceiving at the most basic level is a product of the terms of reference within which they came into being. System A evolved, as we have said, basically in the context of the material external universe. In the process of evolving, it so to speak, incorporated the laws of that universe into its own nature. Thus it is the case that System A, like Joey during his psychosis, conceives of the universe as a machine. One could say that it prefers this view, but actually the case is more extreme. System A can only see the universe as a machine. There is no other possibility. When you consider the way that science talks about life and about machines, that they talk about being able to one day create life, whilst conversely saying that humans are just a collection of cells. So something like abortion is okay because the baby's just a collection of cells, or you don't actually have consciousnness, it's just chemicals firing off. And they'll even explain things like emotions as the same thing. They're just chemicals. It's just chemical reactions. You know, don't get too attached to something. It's just a chemical reaction. The system A is is extreme. If people just think in that way, if they just see the world in that one way, it's very extreme, and it's also dehumanizing. But there's a chapter later on called the where is it? Not old and new man. The psychotic. I did do a video on the one the Psychotic Society. There you go, based on the counter argument for the Neurotic Society. System B, conversely, evolved within the body. It at no time ever saw itself as other than the centre of its own being. As it became aware of the external universe, as in time it did, it imposed the laws of its own being on that universe. This is a process we can observe in the young child. Whereas System A sees itself as merely a byproduct of the universe, System B sees the universe as an extension of itself. From the subjective standpoint of System B, the universe exists simply to fill the needs of System B. To the extent that the universe is perceived as a separate object, it is conceived of as an organism. In a sense, System B gives birth to the universe. It can only see the universe as an organism. There is no other possibility. So that's the the sort of Gaia worship that we see with the people who are Green Party people and sort of environmentalists. What you need is you need like a combination of the two. So you need to have a system of governance or of understanding that both sees everything as alive, but also sees everything as some sort of plan. It's like a blueprint, but everything is alive. So you're part of a living system, but that system has a sort of a direction and a purpose, and it's not just you that's alive and everything is there to serve you. It's that everything has a life, but it is also in a way clockwork or anyway. A materialist, or in brackets a scientist, might well accept the above as an account, an unnecessarily exaggerated account of the objective and subjective processes. He would, however, add, but, of course, the universe really is only a machine. A priest or a mystic might similarly, with reservations, also accept the above account, but would probably add, but, of course, the universe really is an organism. That is, the Spirit of God made manifest, which moves in all things. A more reasonable person might feel that we must forego the luxury of ever hoping to know what the universe really is. So far, it turns out to be whatever one's terms of reference predetermine. That is to say, the answer is begged by the method. One could say uncharitably by the nature of the prejudice involved, or more charitably by the nature of the means of perception in the two cases. Certainly, if we rely either on System A or System B alone, we must inevitably forego any whole or absolute view of the universe and settle instead for one that is only relatively absolute. The scientific method will no doubt be unused to hear in itself described as a form of prejudice. Nevertheless, what is sauce for the goose should also be sauce for the gander. Science in the 20th century is as prejudiced about religion and similar phenomena as religion has long been about science. This book proposes that the universe is neither a machine nor an organism, except in the sense that it is at least both. In all such discussions, moreover, it is essential to remember that we, at least, are organisms first and machines second. There you go. That's the end of that chapter. So we're going to start. I'll start chapter 10 because we're early on this. So Let me just load up my chapter. It's just partly for my own pleasure, and also so that I can see where it is for when I cut these up, because I've actually put the first 3 chapters up now, and they've been slightly edited into, you know, chapters. I've cut out the beginnings and ends of the weekly sessions and just put them into actual chapters, and they're on BitChute and Odyssey. So if you want to share anything, you could start sharing the chapters or the playlist. I've put them in playlists, I think, on both of those. So you can share the playlist and it'll be the whole book as it goes on, sort of thing. The only way out is in. The meaning of life can only be realized on a subjective level to have real meaning, but it usually ends up being a universal objective truth for most to explore. It's to know thyself. Yeah, but that, you know, that phrase, know thyself, I think does sort of sum up the objective subjective thing, really, doesn't it? Because to know yourself is also to know the universe, because you're part of the universe, and you're not delegating, you know, you're not relegating yourself, to just being some kind of clockwork animal, or, you know, clockwork toy within a clockwork universe. You're actually exploring your nature, and through your nature looking for reflections of that in nature, so that you can test the truth in it, so you can test the objective reality in your subjective experiences. So you use nature as a reflection. So know thyself is it's an old phrase, obviously. Or in other words, learn how to live and die in line with nature and the nature of who you are, i.e. both systems. Yeah, that's it. Trevor right, it is subjective until proven otherwise. I like that as well. Yeah, but also, Trevor, when you're dealing with somebody, who is in complete denial of their other side, so somebody in complete denial of their system B, so you're talking to somebody who's system A, perhaps, and they're in complete denial of their system B, and they'll tell you that there's only objective reality that exists. So unless you've got the papers to prove what you're saying, they'll never believe you. And you know, some things you can't. There's some things that they're wrong about. Okay, so there are some things in the world that the corporations, banks, and politicians are not right about, but they don't know it yet, because they're stuck in this. They're in denial of their own nature, and until they've experienced their own nature, they're going to continue to stay in denial, and then they're going to impose that on us, which is what we're sort of seeing happening at the moment. Is that we're having the fears and the sort of system A strict objective viewpoint being imposed on all of us as a way of saying, no, look, this is the science, and the science is in, and like the science is right about all this, and, you know, viruses are a real thing that attacks the body, and we have to fight the viruses off, and we have to, you know, and to do that, we've got to create something synthetic that we're going to inject you with, and somehow a synthetic thing is going to save you from something that is apparently natural but not natural at the same time. So it's not even alive. The virus isn't even alive. It's just, you know, it's just something, but they don't know what it is because they've never photographed a virus outside of the human body still to this day. So they're sort of like, well, we find them inside the body when we apply dyes to human cells, and then we start seeing these things appear in the dye. Okay, well, what if the dye is actually like, what if the dye is what's making the cell give off these things that are, you know, repelling the dye, trying to, as the cell is dying from you applying dye to the cell, it's giving off other parts of the cell. It's just so much about it that they've just, they're in their model. It has to be that they're right and you're not right, because even though you could have the feeling that they're wrong, until you've got the papers to prove it, and like I say, there's some things they're not going to be able to get the papers for. When we go into the paranormal later on with Stan Gooch's book, The Paranormal, there's just like a whole world out there. There's a whole universe in there, not out there. There's a whole universe in this subjective universe of System B. There's a whole universe in there that is yet to be explored. And these people are in complete denial of it, but unfortunately they're also in control of everything. So, in a way, we're stuck in this position where until we overthrow the tyranny of System A, we're not going to be able to advance. But System A, we don't want to overthrow it and destroy System A, because we need System A as well. We just it needs to be kept in, it needs to understand itself. That's the problem, is that System A needs to understand itself, and how when it's out of control it represses the other side, the System B. But System B can't live without each other, because it's all inside us, and it's like you're trying to destroy yourself, essentially. All you can do is genetically engineer humans to not be human anymore. The only way out is in. Nature is microscopic, yeah. If you see it reflected in you, and you see it and you observe it reflected in nature, we know nature's fractal. We can see from just the most simple, like I was saying, there's basic plan. There's a basic plan. There is a machinery to it. There is an objective machinery to it. You can observe the fractality in nature. So there's a machinery to it. But that doesn't mean that you're just a machine, because there's obviously life as well. Because we've also ended up in this position where nature is trying to find something out, and creating more and more complex life forms with greater capacity to perceive. So why is that? Why are we? The evolutionary view is that there is no. If you read Dawkins and people like that, there's no direction to evolution. It's like a blind watchmaker making tiny adjustments all the time, and there's no real direction. If there's no real direction, why the fuck are chimpanzees where they are and we're where we are? So why are we at the position of perceiving everything? Why would nature invent something that just wants to understand itself? And nature's trying to understand itself. The universe is trying to understand itself. And we'll get into all that in the paranormal anyway. Did I say microscopic as well? Did I say microscopic? I meant microcosmic. Yeah, I just misread your words there. Sorry. Even if you have the papers, they ignore them. Yeah. Or they even if you've got all the receipts, they ignore them, or they cover the receipts in what they call like phytoestrogens, so like you end up wiping yourself out even if you have got the receipts. Yeah, so go and read, go and look up a bit of I posted it today on Twitter, the German New Medicine video for Virus Mania. If Very interesting. Anyway, let's do 10 minutes of chapter 10. Here we go. Hold tight. Chapter 10, Old and New Men, the recent evolution of the nervous system. The evolution of Homo sapiens. 1. This chapter is concerned principally with the physical evolution of man. However, physical evolution blends gradually into the psychological and cultural, particularly as one approaches historical times. The two cannot be sharply separated. At the general physical level, our argument treats man globally as mankind. In connection with some precise physical changes, however, and in any case at the general cultural level, the focus shifts to the development of man, specifically in Europe and the Middle East. Reference to man's cultural development elsewhere is then made for comparative purposes only. The facts reported are as accurate as the many gaps in the fossil and archaeological record currently allows them to be. It needs to be kept in mind that the new discoveries occasionally produce major changes in the views of authorities. Nevertheless, on the positive side, there does exist some measure of general agreement on broader outlines, and this situation is unlikely to change drastically. As a preliminary step, the highlights of the available record of man's physical evolution are briefly summarized. Australopithecus africanus, literally southern African ape, and Australopithecus robustus. These primates existed some 2 million years before present, and 1.5 million years before present, respectively. Their remains are found in Southeast Africa. They were primitive tool users, but possibly not tool makers. They had no use of fire, brain capacity around 500 cubic centiliters. Homo habilis, skillful man. This is a classification contested by some anthropologists. Homo habilis is possibly simply a rather advanced Australopithecus, or, as is claimed by some, he may be early true man. He existed around 1.75 million years BP, or perhaps even earlier, in Central Africa. A tool maker, still having no use of fire. Brain capacity in the region of 650 cubic centiliters. Homo erectus, upright man, originally called Pithecanthropus, ape man. Homo erectus was widely distributed in Java, China, Africa, and possibly Europe 500,000 years before present. He had the use of fire and probably cooked food, an extensive tool maker with permanent cave dwellings. Probably practiced cooperative hunting. Brain capacity range from 750 to 1200 cubic centiliters. See figure 22b. Where's that? 22. Oh, yeah. Okay. I've got these. Hold on. There you go. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, Neanderthal man. So-called classic Neanderthal man existed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago in western and southwestern areas of Europe. Cut off during this time by the Würm glaciation, both from his near relatives, the Neanderthaloids, and all other varieties of early man. His average brain capacity is generally agreed to have been larger than that of modern man. The head is massive, i.e. around 1,400 cubic centiliters, but the brow of the head is flattened, receding rapidly from prominent brow ridges, the skull low vaulted, though wide, and the occipital region, the rear, expanded by a curious swelling. So you see that in figure 22c. In stature, this type of Neanderthal was short, average height for males 5'4", females 4'10", barrel-chested with extremely powerful curved thighs and forearm bones. Some of these and other details of his physique are clearly well suited to the Ice Age conditions in which he lived. His culture, including hand axes, bone tools, personal ornaments, etc., ritual burial of the dead was practiced, sometimes along with personal possessions, food, and so on. This last is important, for it argues strongly for the existence of religious or magical practice and a belief in life after death. In Southeast Europe, the Near East, North Africa and elsewhere are found what are termed Neanderthaloid remains. Or Neanderthaloid, you could say as well. I did say it earlier. In most cases, roughly contemporaneous with classic Neanderthal. These exhibit some, but not all of the features of the classic type, usually, but not always, in less extreme form and sometimes along with more modern characteristics. Various explanations of these finds exist in the literature. The two major views, sufficient for our purposes, are one, that the find represents an ancestral stock from which classic Neanderthal on the one hand and modern man on the other evolved separately, and two, that the Neanderthaloids represent a mingling of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon strains. See below, this cross leading to the emergence of our own variety of Homo sapiens. So is that that one there? No. See below. Where was that one? Right. Okay. Early Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon man. This variety overlapped with, in time, succeeding and entirely replaced classic Neanderthal in Western Europe. Cro-Magnon man was more or less solely dominant throughout Europe by 25,000 years before present. Cro-Magnon was tall, average height around 6 foot, well muscled and powerful, though not in the gross manner of Neanderthal, and without the curvature of thigh and arm bones. His skull profile closely resembles our own. The forehead is high, as is the vault of the skull, the bone thin. It lacks both heavy brow ridges and rearward occipital bulge. The chin is well formed and jutting, in contrast to Neanderthal's chin, which receded abruptly from the lower teeth. In general, the features are regular and, to us, aesthetically pleasing. See figure 23. Cro-Magnon's culture included fine stone and bone tool, many of these ranking as works of art, arrowheads, spearheads, needles, and so forth. He produced sculptures, engravings and cave paintings, these last having undoubted magical and symbolic connections, and practiced ritual burial of the dead. During subsequent millennia, further waves of yet other people moved up from the east, whence Cro-Magnon himself had emerged, in time mingling with, diluting and modifying the Cro-Magnon strain. Europe between 9,000 and 5,000 before present. By 9000 BP, village farming communities are firmly established in the Near East, with domestication of animals, production of pottery, and so on. Simple cultivation and the domestication of animals was probably established by 11,000 BP. With the discovery of metal, the Bronze Age begins in Mesopotamia during the latter part of 6000 BP, and this development spreads rapidly throughout the Near East during 5000 BP. The foregoing is a brief outline of the position as generally agreed upon by the experts in the fields concerned. One then comes to the interpretation of the fact, at which point it should be realised we have very much entered the area of opinion and counter-opinion. One further solid fact, however. In Western Europe, classic Neanderthal disappears abruptly over a period of perhaps only hundreds, at most a few thousand years, around 35,000 BP. No continuity of his lifestyle or culture, with one notable possible exception, the custom of burying the dead, and no anatomical continuity between classic Neanderthal and his successor Cro-Magnon have been found. Though the two varieties are adjacent in time, there is between them what archaeologists term a sterile horizon. That Neanderthal suddenly disappeared was as suddenly replaced by Cro-Magnon is, then, a well-agreed established fact. What is not established is whether the two events were causally connected or not related, even though adjacent. We do not know and can only speculate whether classical Neanderthal was systematically wiped out by Cro-Magnon, or whether some natural event, for example, a disease carried by the latter, brought about the catastrophe. Parallels for both these events can, after all be found in historical times, or whether perhaps the retreating ice cap of the Würm interstadial around 40,000 BP created climatic conditions in which Neanderthal was now not well suited to survive, but which on the other hand gave Cro-Magnon the impetus to migrate up from the southeast. All these explanations are in no way necessarily mutually exclusive. The interest of this book centres on the Neanderthaloids of the Near East and to some extent elsewhere of some 75,000 years ago, and on the question of their origin, whether precisely they represent a mixed parent population whence descended both Cro-Magnon and classic Neanderthal, or whether they represent a crossing of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon varieties which led to the emergence of modern man. Both theories are possible. The general background is, however, yet more complex. Not only must we ask, did, around 75,000 years ago, a parent population of mixed characteristics evolve into the types of classic Neanderthal on the one hand and Cro-Magnon, and thence into ourselves on the other, but we must ask also whether this happened at that time, if it happened for the first time, or, as a number of authorities believe, had the splitting of an initial ancestral stock into two recognisable types, Old Style and New Style, already occurred a very long time ago. A.S. Romer comments, "We have noted grounds upon which to base a belief that throughout the Pleistocene, the story of humanity was woven of two strands, and that neanthropic New Style man has had a line of descent long separated from that of his more simian-appearing relatives. Included in the evidence which leads observers to conclude that New Style man has been on the scene long before Cro-Magnon as such put in his appearance, and he incidentally would, in case probably, be the cousin or perhaps descendant of earlier modern man, are such finds as the skulls from Swanscombe in England and Steinheim skulls in Germany. These, unfortunately, are in a fragmentary state of preservation only. The available skull bones, nonetheless, are thinner, not merely than those of Neanderthal, but in some respect than many of the much later Neanderthaloid or mixed varieties of the Near and Middle East. The Steinheim skull, in particular, has a moderate brow ridge and a rounded rear. Yet both the Swanscombe and Steinheim finds are dated around 250,000 BP. Zoologists, of which A.S. Romer is one, are not essentially concerned with such considerations as types of weapons, styles of hunting, and the general sociology or psychology of early man, matters which, for better or worse, make the task of the anthropologist in some ways more difficult. The zoologists quite legitimately base their classifications on observable anatomical features. Possibly, for this reason, and perhaps it is an entirely adequate reason, zoological opinion appears to be in little doubt as to the validity of its classification of early man into the two-part division of paleoanthropic, literally old man, and neanthropic, new man, over a considerable period of time. The general features of the paleoanthropic and neanthropic skulls are respectively more or less those noted already with reference to classic Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon. The paleoanthropic skull has pronounced brow ridges, receding forehead, low though broad vault, a projecting occiput, a jutting or prognathous muzzle with large teeth but a recessive chin. All head bones are thicker and more massive than in the neanthropic skull. By contrast, aside from being generally less massive, the neanthropic skull has, as stated, a high forehead, absence of pronounced brow ridges, a high vault to the skull, a rounded occiput, and a well-defined jutting chin. Quite why nature apparently produced two generalised types of early man and not 4 or 7 or 10 types is puzzling, though to this book extremely interesting. What one seems to have, reverting now to the descriptive method of chapter 6 and either considering each skull feature individually or the skull as aggregates, is something very like a bimodal, perhaps presumably normal, distribution of skull characteristics, one mode or mean of which is the paleoanthropic, the other the neanthropic. The overlap of the two distributions, this being, one recalls, what produces the bimodal distribution, can accommodate types of skulls intermediate between the modes, the so-called mixed populations. To have shown that owners of suggestively modern skulls were living in various parts of the world well before the advent of Cro-Magnon is not to have proved conclusively, due both to the occasional and fragmentary nature of the finds, that Neanthropic man was in existence throughout the whole of the very long period in question, if, of course, at all. Even if this were proven to be the case, this still would not exclude the possibility of a new and independent budding of modern man from a paleoanthropic stock in the Near East some 100,000 to 75,000 years ago. One could indeed postulate that nature made a number of attempts at producing Neanthropic man at various times, all of which failed, except the last, perhaps because of the relatively delicate constitution of these creatures in the face of new ice ages or other catastrophes, or their hardier relatives. Meanwhile, more sturdy paleoanthropics might soldier ruggedly on. While the view just expressed has something to recommend it, it is not, on the whole, my own. In particular, as stated, I reject the view that Cro-Magnon evolved in the Near or Middle East from the mixed Neanderthaloid population whose remains we find there. I adopt instead the current majority view that Cro-Magnon evolved elsewhere and thence invaded Europe via the Middle East, overrunning and at least partially destroying the Neanderthal populations as he did so. So I think I'm going to stop there because that's literally the end of the page, but we've got quite a lot to go on this chapter still. Old and new, yeah. This is a massive chapter. Let me just try and work out how much it is. Oh yeah, 303. It's about 70 pages to go. So what was I going to say so you can see that that he's not quite onto the hybrid origin theory yet. It's just sort of mulling it over. But yeah, there's some hints that he's sort of starting to get interested in the origins. But what was I going to say? Oh no, it's probably about giants. I've got like a little theory on giants, that giants are the gelded slave Cro-Magnon, that because in Northern Europe there's all of the Northern European mythologies talk about giants. So if you've ever read History of Kings of Britain, Geoffrey of Monmouth, he says there that when Brutus came to Britain, that the island was inhabited by giants, and that Brutus and his men just went round the whole island fighting giants. And Cornwallis was the greatest giant fighter of all of them, and that Cornwall was named after him because he caught one of the biggest giants in Cornwall and threw him over the cliffs there. So my sort of pet theory on what giants are now. So giants in the mythology, giants were the remaining Cro-Magnons. So Cro-Magnon, after the hybrid event, Cro-Magnon carried on moving north until he got to Scandinavia and Britain, and that was the final place that he was sort of the pure strain of Cro-Magnon was eradicated. But some of them might have escaped. They might, because who knows what sort of technology they had really. They might have been like, some sort of Aryan god, and or seen as some sort of Aryan god. And so they did have some technology, boats or something like that, and they may have escaped to America. But when you geld an animal, so when you cut off a horse's testicles as a colt, that they get bigger. The actual animal itself. So you can see it with balls. The animal, the bull, not balls. So when they take the balls of the bull, they grow really big because it's something to do with the. I can't quite remember why. Something to do with the testosterone being cut off or something. But they end up growing massive. So gelded animals are a lot bigger than the normal version of the animal. So my speculation is that the giants that they've found where they've covered it up, that some of them are sort of 8 foot and things like that. So Cro-Magnon was probably 6 foot to 7 foot, and so when they captured the giants, they would castrate the young giants to make sure that they didn't, get with the women, or so they couldn't dominate anymore. And that by cutting their testicles off, they made some of them into giant men. And that's why that's why there's record of giant skeletons being found around the world. They're just gelded Cro-Magnon. Anyway, that's just my own little theory added in there. So I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks to everyone for coming along and listening and being in the chat. Trevor, The Only Way Out is in. Ralph. We had a couple of people at the beginning, not sure whether they stuck around. Zyan, Edits, and GT. I'm guessing not, because they didn't make any comments. So yeah, thanks you lot for tuning in and all that. Anyone on? No, it's no one on. No one on D Live. Okay, so I'm gonna sign off anyway. Cheers. See you all next week. Bye.